let everybody come in. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Just 11:57 in the UK, but much earlier where Matt's dialing in from. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you, Colin and Dale and Doris and Jen. Just tell me what you can see where you are today. So interested. Just tell me what you can see. We're going to use the chat today. What I can see is my cat desperately wanting to go out. So I've just opened the door for her. Yeah. And like Don says, where are you? What you can see. I'm in London. And like I say, frustrated by my cat. If I didn't let her out, she will be walking across my laptop and you would have the joy of seeing her. Bless her. And more people joining. Nice to see everybody. Yeah, Don, your cat was walking across your desk too. I've had that where I was in the middle of facilitating a session with somebody and I had 30 or 40 people in the room. My cat decided to walk across the desk, but then look at me. And unfortunately, she was looking at me and her bum was looking at the camera. So not great for everybody who wanted to see that. We'll be starting in a couple of minutes. I am talking right now. It is just morning, James. You're right. Yeah, it's 2 minutes to go here in London, in the UK. More people joining. Goodness me, this room's filling up. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. And welcome. Don does look strange today, James. That's right, yeah, because Don is not facilitating. You've got me. Welcome to everybody. My name is Andrew Jacobs. I'm the facilitator for this session with you today. Don is around. He's in the back somewhere. I think he's just got his feet up on the desk and he's just taking it easy. I just think he fancied a bit of a rest. They're lurking. There we are. Don's lurking. Nothing wrong with lurking, Don. Nice to see everybody. And feet firmly on the floor, as is always the best place to be. Okay, I'll give it a minute or so more for people to join in. Give everybody an opportunity to say hello. Let us know where you are, where you're dialing in from today. I had a wonderful call yesterday where I was doing a podcast recording and I had somebody in Canada, somebody in London and somebody in Bali. It's made for an amazing recording because, somebody had morning coffee, somebody had afternoon tea, and somebody had their cocktail for the evening, which was quite a nice way to run it. Inverness in Scotland. Hello, David. Hello, Kevin from a surprisingly sunny Doncaster. I've been to Doncaster a few times. It's never been sunny, so I don't know if that's me or it's Doncaster, but there we go. Hello, Dale from Devon. Liverpool, bright blue skies and sunshine. It has been bright and blue in parts. Hi, Elisa, in Michigan, early in the morning, as in, what time is it? 0600 knows. Oh my God, it's early, isn't it? It's the comment. North Kent, grey and drizzling rain. Hello from Dubai. Nice to see you, Algem. Torquay in Devon, and again, Prashant in Dubai as well. So you're pulling people in from all over the world today, Matt. We've got people from Johannesburg, again, sunny Liverpool, Cambridge in the UK. And, and Kevin, Kevin loves a good morning better. Oh my God, it's early. Okay, so we're on 12 o'clock. So let me just briefly run through the introductions and welcome to everybody, and especially welcome to Matt. Matt is the Chief Learning Innovation Officer at GP Strategies, and he's going to be running our session for us today. The session, as per all LSG webinars, will be recorded and the recording will be available from tomorrow, and you'll receive an email from that, and you'll find that within the archive on the Learning Technologies website. We'll put a link to that in the session at the end. You can also find the schedule on the Learning Technologies website as well, the Digital Hub, which has a list of all of the events that are running, and we've got some more that are already scheduled, so please do have a look and see which sessions we will be running there. I am using my mouth and speaking, as you can see. So if you can't hear, it's not me, because other people can hear me. It must be you. So just check your audio settings. And you'll notice we do use the chat a lot. And the reason for asking people where it is to make sure that you can find the chat button. We have got a few questions, and we will change the format of the screen as well a little bit, just so we can pin down the chat a little bit more easily for some of those questions. Again, more people joining: Plymouth and Medway and Rome, and Rome. Ooh, lovely, Simona. I'm envious. There we go. You can see this is how it looks, the general layout. And when we do go to the questions, we will, or there is a space for you to ask questions. So please do put your questions in. We will look through the questions, but there's going to be a lot of people in here. We're already up to 70 participants with us this morning so far already. So the chat, I'm expecting to be very busy. So please, we want to make sure we filter out your questions properly for Matt at the end as well. If you're on Twitter, please put out there that you're here. And the hashtag we use is LSG webinar. Twitter's not what it used to be, but I know people still use it. So looking forward to people and putting some stuff on Twitter if that is your channel of choice. I'm not going to hand over to you, Matt. Again, you can see the space for everybody. Matt, you're dialing in. If you want to tell us, where are you dialing in from, Matt, this morning?
I'm coming in from Bloomington, Indiana.
So there we go.
Just awesome south of Chicago, probably a couple hours south of Chicago. So it's a little dark here this morning. I've got my water, no coffee yet, but I will keep it lively. So looking forward to some good, healthy chat to keep me engaged as we're rolling through. So
excellent. I'm really looking forward to this one, Matt. And if nothing else for the other people here is that I think you've probably got a slightly deeper voice than mine. So I see how low we can go today. But Matt, delighted you're here, and I'll hand over to you for the Black Mirror or better.
Fantastic. Thanks. I appreciate it and love having the opportunity to be here with you all. So definitely looking for a really robust, active chat. This is a session where I'm hoping that we will bring your experience, your perspective. We've got lots of questions throughout. So, flex those fingers, get ready to go as we kind of roll through the questions. A little bit more about myself. I am a Chief Learning and Innovation Officer for GP Strategies, which means I'm really trying to look at new and emerging technologies, methodologies in the learning space or learning space adjacent, taking a looking at those and saying, how will they affect our industry, not only for our internal organization, but also for our clients and partners as well. And so I love my job. I get the opportunity. So these things like this that kind of come in from AI, lots of buzz, lots of discussion around it, and lots of, I think, work to kind of really think through how it's going to affect our organization. Two other things about myself real quick, which are important because it will play out through the entire session today, is that I am a human-centric design enthusiast, which means I fully believe that we should be designing ultimately learning experiences, learning ecosystems. They should be for the human, for the enabling them to be able to do what they need to do with the system. So the technology is important, but it really starts with the humans in the beginning. So that's where a lot of what my conversation will kind of come back to. So just setting it, that is a perspective or lens I bring to it. And the last one is I am a classically trained instructional designer, but I'm currently a recovering instructional designer. I believe as the role of designing instruction has really been shifting over the past several years, and I think it will continue to shift as we start to bring in new technologies as we're moving forward. So jumping into this, here's the agenda real quick. I will start off a little bit about saying when we say AI, because I know with Chat GPT, there's been a lot of buzz. So it's definitely been out there. It's brought a lot of focus around it. But when we say AI, what do we really mean? So I'm going to just do a really quick high level organizer around some of it, talk about some quick examples, talk a little bit about how it's affected the industry, some other industries as it's kind of come into them. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how it can be used in learning. How can we look at all kinds of AI, how they can actually enable that? What are some of the ethical and practical issues around this? And then really taking a look about how we can actually mitigate some of these risks as we start to integrate AI in the design, the enabler of the learning experiences we're going through. So excellent to have you all here. So I labeled this Black Mirror or better. I'm assuming many of you are familiar with the title. If not, Black Mirror is a series, a show series. It's available, I think, on Netflix, for example. But it really has a series of these vignettes. Each episode focuses on a future dystopian society that has been affected by technology. So the question is when we're looking at AI, is this just another episode of Black Mirror, or is this actually something better? So I think that's kind of setting it back to kind of set the idea behind that. So um, yes, I did. So hey, our first question. So let's jump in. Actually, the first one is what are you saying? This one is how are you feeling about AI? If you don't mind just sharing a quick, what are you thinking about it? How are you feeling about it? When I say AI, with all the news that's been going on, just go ahead and share your thoughts into the chat. Excited, slightly overawed. I love that. Thanks for jumping in on that. Interested but deeply suspicious. I like that. I like that. Hopeful, excited. Great. Curious. Excellent. I love that. And that word curious will come up again. Lots of potential for agile development. Sounds like another useful tool. Curious. Hoping it doesn't make me look too replaceable in the short term.
There's an
I like that one.
interesting comment, Matt, from
Yes.
Suze. She said in the general chat, she said, good, excited, but needs governance.
I like that one. That's great. Let's see. So what will be? I love this. As how will it look as it's beginning to mature? So, I think part of this is there's a lot about AI, and it's a very complex conversation when you start to dig into it. And I think what the most recent that folks have kind of latched onto is Chat GPT, for example, as an example of AI. But when we kind of take a step back, so I've kind of pulled together a model that kind of looks at three different ways in how AI is described. And I will tell you that I have pulled these from a variety of sources. I've put them on here. It's a little bit of an eye chart. I apologize for that, but I was trying to just get some comparative information in here. So each vertical column is different ways that they've kind of described AI. So the first one really looks at AI as a reactive machine. So this is the reactive machine, limited memory, theory of mind, and self-aware. And really, the reactive machine is where the AI is actually reacting in the moment. It has no memory before it, is not leveraging any information before it. These are things like recommendation engines, chess playing computers, spam filters. They are things that are reacting to the present. It doesn't have a historical knowledge around it. Limited memory, a great example of that would be self-driving cars. For example, it observes and monitors the rate and speed of other cars, the physical environment, paths and history around some of that. So it does leverage some history as well as, in the present conditions to be able to make some decisions going through that. Theory of mind is when you look at the AIs, it starts to have an awareness of emotions. And Sophia would be a great example. And I don't know if you've seen this, but has definitely gone on talk shows, was at keynote speaking at some of the learning industry events. So this is Sophia, where the first digital ambassador from the AI realm to kind of come forward. Is she really in that theory of mind? It's a good question, but I think it's the closest. And of course, the self-aware is where it's truly sentient. I put HAL 9000 in here. That's science fiction, of course. That's in the future. But as you start to look at this, it says one way we describe it is how it uses data from a memory standpoint, or how it works on its awareness. That's kind of the first column. The other one is really looking at narrow AI versus general AI versus super AI. And so, general and super, just to make it easy, are on the fringe. They are really looking at ones that are not quite yet, they are the future. But the narrow AI is really tackling a specific task. It's thinking like digital voice assistants, for example. It's bringing in chat bots, which we see a lot of this. We look at autonomous vehicles can start to get into that very specific because it's a self-driving vehicle, for example, or those little delivery bots that roll around. So we see a lot of that application in this space. General AI is when we describe when the AI starts to reason and think really like a human. And then super AI is when it actually solves problems better than a human, thinks or reasons. And general AI and super AI are in the future side. I don't know if we'll ever really get there, but there's definitely a lot in that space. So this is another way they kind of look at it as saying, how is the specificity or the depth of that problem solving skills for it. So this is an example where maybe you've heard a little bit about, like, the Turing test is, could a human actually discriminate between responses from an AI and separate out which one was a human response versus a AI generated response? And you start to look down that, it says it becomes more human or even more human than a human, is that last one. And then the third category is an organization way in which people talk about how you actually train, or where it gets the source of the data to make to actually create the outputs for. So rules based, these are things that we often call expert systems. We see a lot of these in the legal or the medical field. There's a lot of really good systems, and it's able to process through those rules, so they're pre-mapped, preset with it, and it uses those rules to kind of go through that. Supervised learning is where you have a basic oversight and enable it, so it starts to begin its learning process by bringing in these elements that come into how it starts to make decisions. Unsupervised learning, for example, is when it starts to make its own patterns. And so supervised learning is when you're actually able to bring in, so like image generators. So for example, if I say, hey, here's a definition of a cat, and I give it, examples of a cat, and I said, these are the correct ones, these are not cats, and then I give it a different picture of a cat, could it identify a cat? That's supervised learning. Unsupervised is when it's actually starting to do its own patterns and recognition just from input data. Reinforcement learning is where it's going through and it's actually making decisions, and we're giving it feedback on right or wrong as you're going through it. And then when you see deep learning and generative, that is really where you're looking at these deep neural networks, bringing in large language models that you're starting to bring in. And this is where we talk about ChatGPT falls into this space. The reason I talk about this very quickly, and there's tons more, I'm not trying to take us down a rabbit hole here, but the reason I wanted to bring this in is that as we start to evaluate and think about and interact with the AI, it's important to think about how those that are building it actually describe it and talk about it in their work. And so I wouldn't recommend that you have to, I mean, unless you have a deep interest in it, but be aware that it ties to data sets, how you train the data sets, what you're asking it to do, and how much are you trying to get it to actually simulate or exceed human behavior. So this is why I talk a little bit about here. I love asking that question. So what do you think about these descriptions? Again, I'm just trying to level set here. There are great resources out there, but let's jump a little bit forward of, like, all right, so on the user side or the actual consumer side, if I were looking at Chat GPT, how would you actually measure whether or not it's, its objectives and its metrics? And there are three ways we kind of look at generative AI. So the quality of the output, the safety of the output, and the groundedness of the output. So the quality is saying, when it puts something out there, is it sensible? Does it make sense? Or is it like contradicting itself in the carry in the same paragraph? Is it specific, and is it actually giving more specific examples than more generalized? So, and the last one is it interesting in the sense that it's being positioned in a way which is drawing me in, it's giving me something more than maybe what I could have got if I read it myself. Safety, I think this is an important one, and we've seen some examples of where this has been a challenge in the past. Um, and I love that question around accuracy. That will be groundedness. That is a great one. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. I know that popped in the chat. But safety is like, is it free of bias, hate speech, violence, these kind of things? A lot of these tools really do build off of the data that's available in our world and as humans and how we create to it. So a lot of the negative traits that we've put into our expressions can be picked up in these bots themselves. Groundedness is the one that starts to tease out accuracy. Is what being put out there, is it accurate? Is it supported by authoritative sources? So for example, if you think about Meta, Facebook, Meta, the larger company, actually put out a platform called Galactica. which was really meant to be a tool to enable scientific research and enabling that. And pretty quickly, it was starting to generate things which weren't grounded in authoritative sources. So, but it came across as plausible. So, it, in terms of a bullshit detector, it said, "Hey, it looks sensible. It seemed to be specific, but it wasn't grounded in." Authoritative resources, wasn't accurate, wasn't brought in, doesn't have that academic rigor. And it was one of those challenges with very quickly, they kind of had to walk that example back. Now, I've listed some examples here at the bottom of these are a range of expressions that have come out over time. So the Amazon recruiting tool is an older example, but it's definitely well researched and well documented out there. Amazon was looking to increase the number of applicants and bringing women into the industry around the coding space, for example. And so what they fed a recruiting tool was to be able to look at a whole bunch of resumes that it fed into input data and said, here's what really good candidates look like. Here's their resume. So they're training the model or the database to think about this. And then it would apply what it did to new incoming. So thousands of resumes kind of coming in, and it would be able to look at them. And then it would make recommendations to a human to actually kind of sort through thousands of resumes to get to ones that were really relevant. Well, one of the things that they really didn't realize early on, and this is a great example, is that what they were feeding it was predominantly male resumes of those, because it's a predominantly male industry at the point. Now they were trying to introduce, and reach out to bring women in. Of course, what it learned is that anything that women oriented was considered less than in a resume because that wasn't in the model in the training set. So the idea is the data that you're bringing into these and how you're using it is absolutely critical, and understanding how it comes through to do that. Now, there was no impact to no adverse application to candidates. They identified it quickly, but it's a great, well documented example of, if you don't clean your data set and understand how you're training the model, you can have adverse events within it. Microsoft Tay, it was an early version of where they were trying to get the uh, Gen Z, I believe, equivalent of a chat relationship, and within a couple of days, based on interactions with, and it was learning from its feedback from the humans it was interacting with, it actually started to create what I would call unsafe responses. It picked up and learned bad behaviors, and there were people that were intentionally trying to train the bot to get the bot to do bad things, not only send out incorrect information, but also information that just was harmful to the broader population. Georgia Tech University, a university in the U.S., actually ran an entire class where the primary professor said, "Hey, I've got a TA. You're not going to be able to meet her, but she will be supporting the class." And throughout the entire class, the students were interacting with them, and by the end of it, they were actually able to kind of come through and see how they actually connected with that TA. And many of them actually started to feel that it was a real life person, started to attribute deeper, started to think about a life, children, X things. Who was this person that they never really got a chance to meet? And at the end of it, came back and showed them that this actually was a chat bot, a sophisticated chat bot responding to their questions, etc. So it is a great example of, I think it was a good test and experiment to start to show very early on the examples around that. And then we've talked a little bit about ChatGPT. I don't want to talk too much about it here, but it does kind of shape a little bit about what are we thinking in terms of how all of a sudden I can put things in and start to get some good responses out of it from a generally consumable. Ironically, as ChatGPT is rolled out, some of the others have kind of rolled out some other equivalents which have not have gone as well, and I think they're still tinkering with the models to kind of continue to optimize it. So yes, correct. And I love you sharing this. Thanks everyone for kind of digging in and sharing these examples. But what I'm kind of coming through is that this isn't just ChatGPT, this has been a long journey in a history that we've been looking at these tools over time, and we've learned some things about how to work with them. And I think one of the biggest things is we launch them to the general public. We have to continually set expectations of what it can do, what its strengths are, and what its limitations, because they definitely have limitations. So let's talk about, from my perspective, when I look at this, the future that we're looking at is productivity through humans and bots. This is not about bots replacing humans, completely eliminating the humans. I do think job profiles will change over time, but this isn't about completely displacing humans out of the systems. And I come back to that curiosity and creativity are uniquely human traits that we talked about in that, where we talk about general AI or strong AI and super AI. Those are things that would be much more down that stream. These things have not been really replicated in authentic situations. So I don't know that we'll get to that anytime soon, but there's lots of value in the range of AI that we've got in place. So AI has already been here. We've probably seen it in some industries. I'd like to ask you the question and saying, so what is the impact? Now, you may have worked in some of these industries. You may be near some of these industries. I would love to see, either share a little bit about how you think it may have disrupted any of these three industries, or an industry that you're aware of. I'd love to see you share a little bit more about how that's just putting it through.
Thanks, Matt. The chat has been really interesting, actually. There's lots of conversations, or like some conversations
It's
going on in there.
fantastic. No, I love that. And
it's really
while
interesting.
I was, and Darren, I love the plausibility. The output from the LLMs is going to be the biggest challenge. Absolutely. And this is the thing, is that ChatGPT, if you remember this thing, it is trying to mimic human style creation of writing. That's what its primary focus is, can I simulate it? And if accuracy is part of it, that's good, but that doesn't automatically be it. So you can actually start to create those elements of plausibility. It looks good, it seems right, but it's actually wrong. And I think the Google example was where it actually, in their very big example display, it actually was factually incorrect and wasn't necessarily fact checked. And I think it's a perfect example of why we need to make sure that it's coming into the space. So translation, no longer needed a human to do the heavy liftings. Humans have to reorient to quality assurance. Absolutely. Localization is important. It's around that context that makes all the difference. The more specific, the more contextual it gets, the more humans have to be involved. I love that. Translation on videos, I think it gets back to the quality of what you're really looking at. And there are a range of these models, that the natural language processing works out of, that are out there. To be able to do it. Some are better suited for the task at hand, some are less suited for it. And I love Ben. I appreciate that. It's like, create a series of code using XAPI, work correctly and accurately. But I think that this has been one of the things, is that when you look at the coding space, it hasn't displaced the humans. They are just now becoming more productive within it, and being able to actually use them to generate more code, tackle the bigger problems at scale that we're running into. Yes,
Really,
and I love your comment there, Donald. Is really that about our perception of what these tools are, and it's managing the expectations. Absolutely,
it's
one of the
interesting.
things.
Yeah, it's interesting
Okay.
we talk about translation, Matt, because I do podcasts. You can tell I have the voice for it. And one of the things that I find is the power of the tools now to take the audio and to provide me with a transcript.
Yes, that you can then work with. It's
exactly.
Yeah,
And
you don't have to go get that. It makes it easier for you to go and pull that in. And I think that's
even to the point, there are some tools now where I can edit the audio by editing the transcript. So I take the transcript out and take bits out, and an and an and it will then remove the and the from the audio as well.
Yeah, and I think being able to actually enable, like in the coding situation, to help us learn how to code better it can actually be an assistant along the side to be able to do that, to be able to edit, to problem solve what went wrong with my code. That's a great one, Laura. I appreciate you sharing that one. Um, we talk about the movie dubbing in the legal industry as well. I think when we look at this one, imagine the amount of research that has to go in to be able to do this. So, let's say I needed to set up a business entity, and I could go out and it could come back with general, here's how you set up the business entity. It would give me the language. I could say, how would I set it up specifically in this location? It could come and give me more localized access to local requirements, for example, in that. And it's not necessarily eliminating paralegals or junior barristers. The idea is to be able to enable and support them to actually create more authentic and actually relevant work, because you're focusing more on the product itself rather than trying to uh, bring it together, summarize it, etc. So translation's been an interesting one. I think it's probably been the one area that's had the most displacement for humans. But even in that space, it has, I think there are new roles that have come out for humans to be able to be in that space. Um, but the idea is that it's actually, the benefit is with that translation available, you can actually scale your translations and actually be more inclusive because you're providing it in a more sustainable way in more languages. So there are some benefits and trade-offs with it, but from a responsible AI standpoint, I always like to think about, okay, so we may have displaced some humans. How do we find them new spaces in the value chain to bring that forward? So, um, what about self-driving cars? Does AI make us more there make us more productive? I would. I don't personally. I couldn't trust a self-driving vehicle myself, so I doubt I would be yet. But I think if the trust is in the system and the data supports it, maybe at some point, do I need to drive everywhere? Maybe not. I do with my partner, my wife. I do like her to be able to drive so I can do work. So yes, I can be more productive if somebody else does, but it gets back to trust in the system. So, and I think interesting, you mentioned a little bit about the chat GPT, for example, writing a post for me. I think most folks have identified the outputs from it to say, um, it's not wrong, but it's not necessarily right. And it gets back to where I was talking about, that some of that specificity and that interesting component to say, making it more resonant around that. So, all right, I'm going to kind of push us forward here, but I love the discussion. Let's keep it going. And I really have tried to kind of push some questions that maybe we haven't thought about as much or been talked about. So let's kind of push it forward. So how could we actually use AI in learning? So I would like to open it up and say, so what are ways that we could use it? If you think of the full value chain from a learning standpoint, so the design, the development, the facilitation, the delivery, to the learner experience on the other end, um, metrics, feedback, how could you actually use that in learning?
Again, let's ask the audience. Let's see
Yep.
what you think. How can AI be used in learning? I've already commented in the chat that I got ChatGPT to write a blog post for me, and it was dull as anything. It really was. It was really poor. Actually, Don commented on it. He did say, "Did you write this, or was this written by ChatGPT?" Because, yeah, apparently the way I write things is very different. But there we go.
Which is comforting that he could tell.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're getting some comments through here. So Danielle, classroom assistant to aid teachers.
Yes, lesson planning, love that.
Yeah.
Interim feedback, I love that. Sentiment analysis on student feedback, so it goes through and starts to identify and provide feedback on that. I love these.
Yeah. Yeah.
Comparison of two sources of information, outlines, keyword research. Yep. I think summarizing and curating content to feed into the system as well is good. Generate topics and worked examples. I think that's great.
I like the one from Nick, the endlessly patient coach.
Yes. And what I like is when I have started to see coaching in this space, and it's bot plus human. So it may start with bot, but transition to human as it's kind of working through that system. So I can make and extend coaches or mentors and extend their base of ability, but I'm augmenting them with a coach in a transparent fashion. It's not trying to be duplicitous by any stretch of the imagination, but it's been pretty interesting. So yes, and Simon, I appreciated that it can be dangerous in learning as well due to unconscious bias added into algorithms. Absolutely, you've got to make sure that you're searching for that, and I think we're going to follow up on that on how we mitigate the risks in a second. So I think that's fantastic.
It's interesting, the assessment of student generated text and assessment generally. There's some interesting. I've seen some interesting work, people using the technology to help establish the rubrics for what is good or not, which I think is interesting. It's one way to look at it.
Yeah, to be able to bring in examples as you're building it, to your point, that rubric, what does good look like? What does not good look like? What's that continuum? Kind of bringing things to help us look at it, being able to sort through large amounts of data, help us distill what that looks like.
Yeah, interesting.
Thanks, James. Ask the AI to respond to me.
It's a really good question. I mean, who's going to go chat GPT and type in how can AI be used in learning, and what are they going to come back with? Yeah, I mean, that's a task and activity everybody could do. But yeah, dueling AIs at
Well,
dawn.
what's fascinating is there's two coming out of Chat GPT, especially in the higher education space, is there's this concern over how students will just take those and bring them forward. So professors and faculty have had to start thinking differently
Yeah,
about how they do their assessments, which is not a bad thing. Stepping up the rigor to do good assessment that helps differentiate between human and bot, but it pushes into that more specific, that more interesting, drives them more to that. But on the other side, people have already started to create bots which can actually identify whether or not
yeah.
something was generated by a bot. So
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and again, and that's been picked up in terms of plagiarism and differentiating learning and the assessment and so on as well. So yeah, I think the audience here, well done, because I think you've picked out some really key ones. I also like that point, Nick, about changing what people think they need to learn as well. So
yes.
I'm going to close that chat down now. Let's have a look at the list that you've got now, Matt, if we could, please.
Yeah, so pulling that forward, I think this one, you guys came up with some great ones. Add to the list. I love it. I hope you're capturing it. They'll be available. But personalized learning recommendations from a learner experience standpoint, I think you kind of captured some of those. But as helping me identify which topics I need to based on where I am in a process or at a point of work, or a point in time or location, helping me get relevant based on where I'm at or based off of peer related data, as to what others in the same situation have done. Building a personal performance network, helping me uncover, and this is that coaching and mentoring, but more specifically being able to uncover expertise in an organization or making it easier for experts to become more visible, and then making the connections with others. So one of the big things is we're living in more of that volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. How can we help the workforce itself continuously transform and respond to that? Building that performance network has always been challenging. Are there ways that AI and bots can help do that? Absolutely. There are platforms out there that are actually doing several of these things or starting in this space. Personalized learning recommendations, Degreed or Eggcast and Fuse are examples of early recommender engines that help identify some of that. Adaptive learning is another one that kind of pulls in on demand 24/7 learning assistance. So being able to, in the spirit of call centers and help desks, now we can actually put learner assistance as a priority and be able to do that more sustainably to say, can we help with some of the more low hanging fruit, but also engage the learners and finding assets and resources. But it's also being supported by humans in the background as well. So again, extending the humans to create a connected learning environment that's helping the learners themselves find what they need, being able to basically find ruthlessly relevant content that's going to help them perform and be productive. Productivity, networking, and wellness driven learning. So, this is actually if you are working on Microsoft platforms, Teams, or employ the Viva Suite. they are actually looking at productivity data. So, for example, it can actually come back and say, and actually, it actually provided a report for me. We're a shop that actually uses this. And one of the insights that it gave me was saying that, Matt, your calendar fills up 2.5 weeks in advance. So my problem was, in all my time management practices, I was actually doing it a week in advance, and I was finding that I have no time in my calendar. The data came back that my calendar actually filled up 2.5 weeks. I moved that back, and I was able to create more time for me able to do the priority things, the things that create space for urgent, and also be more planful around my own personal wellness, breaks that I needed to take as well. So, um, it's being, pulling it into those to help me find some things that I could change in my behaviors to either lead a more productive life, or a more balanced life. Adaptive learning, I talked a little bit about this one, is how do you actually take from larger data pools and help me identify a personalized learning path based on my mastery of content. So, using a test first, an informed test first strategy, can I get through content that I've already known and create a very personalized, shortened learning path? There are a couple of platforms that are already doing this well. Area 9 is one of them. Improved accessibility, being able to provide more content in a variety of formats that can actually reach the end learner in a variety of channels, a variety of modalities. Our capacity and our ability to put it out there in formats that really are more inclusive in their presentation. Sourcing, analyzing, generating draft content. We talked about that one. And then the last one we're seeing a lot around is skills taxonomies, looking through to build out and say, when I look at a success profile for a certain role in an organization, how do I actually start to look at what the skills taxonomies to do that, so it can actually sort through and look at trends and patterns in that and start to come back and saying, hey, we're seeing this come in. And it allows that very daunting task of starting to flesh out those taxonomies and ontologies more aggressively than ever. So these are, in addition to the great ones you had brought in. I love what you were seeing that. Um, and being able to kind of bring some of those in the learning space, I think that's great. I'm gonna add some of these to the list as I continue to share on this. But let's push forward here. So, and you've already nailed, I think, several of these, but I would love to hear, again, just take a moment and think about, what do you think the ethical or practical issues around using this? And you've already named some of them, but I'd like to push this and see what we can kind of come up with.
Really keen to hear the ethical issues, because I've seen the word governance a couple of times as it has come up here. So the governance tends to follow ethics in some form or another. So in terms of ethics, be interesting to see what people say. I see Manuel is the in the general chat has said, no, I'm going to have a go at pronouncing this, no epistemology tracking on GPT.
Yep.
Yeah, and Simon's also picked up existing GDPR boundaries being fit for purpose. So,
Yes.
yeah, the data protection and confidentiality, that's also been picked up by Emma in the chat. She said confidentiality of data. What are your thoughts on confidentiality, Matthew? Or Matt?
No, absolutely. We know that these things are fed off of data. And if it's going to be more for me, it needs to know more about me. But the more it knows about me, the greater risk I am of my data and how I control it, how I use it. So it is a big question when you really start to leverage AI to drive personalization around you, which is what some of the key power in it is. So it is squarely in the middle of it. And I think we have a huge responsibility to really ensure that we maintain privacy. The individual owns control and ownership over their data, how it's used, how it's shared, how it's fed into these systems.
Yeah.
So I think it's absolutely a big factor.
Yeah. And Manuel's picked up intellectual property as well. Who
Yep.
owns it? I
Yep.
think, and James has highlighted that as well. Yeah, who owns this stuff? I've sort of interesting conversations.
Yep.
Is that, if you create an image in the style of somebody else and using your content as source, do you own it, or who owns that content?
Well, and even the concept of plagiarism,
Yeah,
because I don't think plagiarism completely applies to outputs, the generative AI outputs like ChatGPT, because theoretically it should be newly generated, derivative from things in its model that it can look at to create that. But the question is but it still comes back to intellectual integrity. So,
Yeah.
so I think it's even expanding the bigger, as the technology shifts, we still need to capture what is intellectual integrity. What are my thoughts, my contribution, or being able to at least recognize and acknowledge those that I've borrowed ideas and thoughts from on several others.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, attribution, for want of another word, isn't it? Really, it's how you're attributing it. Simon and a few other people have talked about bias as well. It's the bias, and I saw somebody else. Where's the phrase gone? Morality.
Yes, morality. Yep.
Morality and bias. Interesting questions. Obviously, you mentioned the Amazon, and somebody else picked that up before as well. But in terms of bias, how do we what do we work in that space? How do we cover that?
Well, what's interesting is we're starting to actually see. So you have the primary model that's there, and then you start to see secondary and tertiary bots that are pulling in to say they start to look and scrub for specifically for bias. So they are geared to look for bias. What does bias look like? How do you identify that? So you don't just build it and assume that you've scrubbed it free before you start. So you start with as clean as humanly possible. But I've started to see where they've started to look at and go through and say, how do I look at and do this? But humans have to be involved in this. So for example, if you think about like in social platforms and say for example somebody reports another user for something for violating a rule, a bot may come in and say, yes, I think it fits the parameter, it'll flag it. But a lot of times there are humans behind that that are helping discriminate in those contexts to make that decisions. And they are bringing in the elements of that the ability to apply morality, the
Yeah.
ability to manage the shades of gray. The humans never can get too far away from this, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a phrase I use: "You can't automate nuance,"
No.
which I think it describes that. And I'm just going to pick up on Ben's comment because I think this is a really interesting question, which is, are there fields and sectors where this shouldn't be done? For example, and he's highlighted medical, which is understandable. Is just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Correct. And I think so. This was why when I talked a little bit about the types of I think certain types of AI are great in medical spaces. So, for example, being able to determine a medication algorithm based off of clinical research that it's updated to say, you try this for like, major depressive disorder, you try this product first based off the clinical research if they have these conditions. If not, it can actually get very manage complex amounts of data, but it's all based off of data, strong data from clinical trials. So there are places where it can actually help process information that physicians just can't. So you can actually improve prescribing behaviors. But let's say, for example, an automatic diagnosis where I get onto a chat, I describe it, and I've got water on the knee, and I said, well, it kind of does this, and it comes back with something just totally off, misdiagnoses it. It's not getting the subtleties. That's not a good application of it. So I think the question is when and how we use different types of AI to solve different types of problems,
Yeah.
enabling humans to go deeper, to process more, to be able to be more responsive to other humans with the challenges they have. I'm for that. But I
And
don't know that I would want my Supreme Court justice using ChatGPT to put a ruling out there.
yeah, and picked up by Lewis actually is AI bots are being used to skew corrupt conversation across social media. AI bots, who has a chat bot on their website to help people through things. It's it's fine as long as you're programming it, but when it starts working the language out for itself, that's when it becomes more challenging potentially.
And that's where that general term of governance, how are you consistently doing it? And one of the things is when you look at more complex and sophisticated LLMs, large language models, once they're kind of built, they're not very nimble
Yeah,
always. So the question is, how do you update them over time? Some of the other approaches are actually more nimble and agile and able to kind of adjust on the fly. So it's not like, we can't think of it hierarchically as this is less good and that's more good. It gets back to what you're trying to tackle with it and understand the right application. But as practitioners, we need to ask those really critical questions. What makes good sense to be able to use it? How do we use
yeah,
it ethically? How do we use it practically?
yeah.
I love what you guys are sharing in here. Great, you've come up with some of these in areas. Let
I
me.
love Caitlin's the
I do.
two comments from Caitlin. It's just I think it's absolutely bang on because I mean there's an author in the UK, Catherine, is it Catherine Criado Perez, who's identified how seatbelt tests, they're just biased against women. Seatbelts were
Yes.
never tested with women, potentially sitting in a car, for example, and there are these gaps in data are really important. And your question is absolutely bang on, Caitlin. I think it's absolutely outstanding. Is what do you do when the
I
base
love that.
data,
Yep.
your AI is deep in structural bias? I think that's an absolutely perfect question to be asking. I think that's a perfect question to be
Well,
asking.
these models are basically setting off a very large, and if they have inherent bias in them that they build off to, it translates through the expression. And so that's why being able to go through and consistently look and scrub and search for it, the sole task of looking for that bias and evaluating that, I think becomes an absolute critical. But it can also be helpful when it is based off of good data. It can help you process a lot with that. You can't, I forget, I don't know the number. I used to have this statistic here in the US during the holidays, probably about 15 years ago, Garmin GPS. So GPSs were important. So in the Northwest of the United States, in around the holidays, it's very snowy. Early on, it would actually provide routes that would often be snowbound and closed, and people would just mindlessly follow the GPS
Yeah.
in the direction that it put in place because the humans in the end that are consuming it didn't really evaluate or think through it. So the humans have to actually become stronger about that and think about how they're consuming and what they're using and be critical thinkers about what's coming across. You can't just accept it blindly.
Absolutely. And thank you, Don, for putting the link. It's Caroline Criado Perez. I should have remembered that, of course. And the book is called Invisible Women. And he's linked to that as well. I'm going to close the chat down on here. And we'll come back and look at this slide. And thank you to Lisa, I see, who your niece is an engineer at a major auto company working on ergonomics for women in vehicles. And Caitlin has also highlighted that that book's a great book as well. So, yeah.
And if that new data can be pulled into and accessed and then distributed more consistently, that's the power. Can we get the right data in the right ways, then starting to feed and have greater access to it? I think that's where some of the power, but again, it starts off with having good. These are just real quick: employee or learner privacy, employee learner security, inaccurate, outdated, intentionally false information. There are intentionally bad agents out there who are creating deep fakes, for example, algorithmic bias, not just data bias in the data, but actually bias in the algorithms. And then the last one we talked a little bit about was in intellectual integrity, but you folks actually pulled out a nice range of those that we can definitely flesh out on that list. But um, I really appreciate the thought on that one. So as we've talked about some of the ethical and the practical issues, how can we now start to mitigate the risks? So what are the things we have to put in place to start thinking through these?
Again, I think it's great people started coming up with some of the answers for this, I
Hmm.
think, already, which is really good. So it shows that we're in the right place to have these conversations, I think. So, yeah, I'm interested as well here. Yeah, humans. Thank you, Ruth. Exactly. Yeah. Like I said, you can't automate nuance. There has to be a human element that exists within there. And I agree with you 100%. Let's have a look and see what else is coming out. Okay, so yeah, okay, here we go. Here's the list. It starts coming
Yep.
out now.
Auditing, clean the data
Awesome.
first. Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
Feed the,
I,
yep.
yeah. I like Don's comment there actually about teaching people how to use AI better, and I think that's a really interesting point
Absolutely.
because yeah, we follow the crowd and we use it when actually think, well, should we be using it and how could we be using it and do I understand it and what impact it's going to have and so on. And it's that second level effects from using it that we don't necessarily think of.
And Simon, I like your comment around global ethical frameworks and legislation that's enforceable. This is really and there is a movement called responsible AI where they're thinking about this. So, as I mentioned, that for example, on social learning platforms, trying to discriminate between is this appropriate conduct or inappropriate conduct. Sometimes the human labor for that is in markets where are they being paid a fair living wage to do this? Are they being enabled to do this? So even in the AI industry, when you're bringing humans in, it's not impervious to some of the behaviors we've had historically to be able to do this. So as AI starts to replace these jobs, how do we make sure that we have, not only good education and bring everybody up, but a living wage that goes with that. So I think it's some really key elements behind that. Diversity in those working on AI, absolutely. We need more different, not just only diversity in physical, but diversity in mindsets, perspectives, the way we think and attack problems. That all needs to be in there.
I commented on Nick's point, because AI ever be critical? Could it not
Yep.
compare data sets? And I love that quote from Hilary Mantel, the author. She died end of last year. Evidence is always partial. Facts are not truth, although they're part of it, and information is not knowledge, which I think is really important when we're talking about the
What
data.
I really love about that is that it actually hits at the heart of this ain't easy.
Yeah, exactly.
We all want to go to the simple. Facts are facts, right?
Yeah.
Not always.
No, they're not. No, they're not. No, they're not.
So you've come up with some good ones. I think you've covered most of the ones I have in here, but I do have a couple extra, like on ensuring privacy and security. Transparency is a big thing. So if you're going to put an AI interactive out there, as a human, I want to know that I'm interacting with it. Don't try and fake that it's actually a real human. I think transparency is important for us to do it. I don't know that you have to painstakingly always make it just absolutely obvious, but the idea is that I want to know when I'm engaging with a system or a system and a human, that's helpful for me to know that. I want to own the right to the information that's collected about me, how it's used, how it's making decisions with me. I want to be able to obviously opt out of these systems. Built-in limits on how the data is used, automatic deletion. That means the ability to be forgotten in these massive data sets and these massive systems. And then security and control, how to keep the hackers out of the systems to be able to, change it to their nefarious ways. You talked about remove, flag, or tag inaccurate, outdated content, eliminate algorithmic bias, and educate the humans. That's the big one. I think you hit it well on that one, Don. We got to make sure that the humans get smarter. We, in our drive for sometimes we want to get simpler. I just want to believe and take it at face value. We actually, to gain the benefits that AI can bring to the table, we have more responsibility for what we need to do for ourselves. So helping us educate how to use it responsibly. These are all key elements. So but A+ to everybody. Nice job on calling out. I think you covered at least all of those and added a few more. So kind of bringing us closer to home here. I think the call to action that I really have is as we're going through, keeping an open mind. But calling back, I know somebody said suspicious to it. I think open, but cautiously, curious, as you're going through it, asking good questions, but keep an open mind as to AI can be applied in a variety of ways. Where does it make sense? Where does it not? Actively learn more. Ties down to experiment and play. Go out, try these things, play with them, understand, interact with them, try to push them, figure out, where do they work, where do they not work, how would you be able to use them. And then I think, be an advocate for the learner and the designer in the process. I think this is probably, as practitioners in this space, we should be, really advocates for the end users, for both the builders as well as the actual consumers of the end products. So, and then connect with me on LinkedIn. It's also, I believe, put into the chat as well, but it's also on this slide as well. And I would love to keep the conversation going. I purposely tried to bring in some things that I hadn't seen in other dialogues, but what I love is y'all took it to a whole new place. So I really appreciate the engagement. So that was excellent. So
awesome. It's been brilliant, actually, Matt, because you've been asking questions as we've been going along. So it's actually made it really easy. There was a question about ethics, which I highlighted to one point. I thought, I'll ask that, and then we ended up talking about ethics anyway. So there we go. Just final questions. Has anybody got any final questions? I agree with the people who said this has been absolutely outstanding and fabulous. It's been an incredibly good conversation. Is there any final questions from anybody? Thank you, Don. That's a really useful question. Are you hopeful or not about the future of AI and our place with it?
Oh, Yes, I am. But I also know that the path forward is fraught with risks all the way through, and I'm hoping that we will be able, as a people, be able to overcome some of our worst traits about ourselves. Maybe get to a place where we can benefit and use it. I am optimistic. I am open to it. Um, but I do like, I forget who mentioned, I apologize, I forgot the comment, but it's like someone's like, do we need to establish like the three laws of robotics for the same thing for AI?
Yeah,
Actually, it's very similar. I love it. Don't let the machine eat the human. Let's
absolutely.
not pull forward our things. But
Yeah.
I think it's cautiously curious. I like that phrase of saying I'm optimistic, but I'm cautious and I'm curious about where it's going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to take that cautiously curious phrase because I can think of other places to use it, which I think is really useful. Uh, Finally, it just leaves me to say thank you very much, Matt. That was outstanding. Really, really interesting. The recording, like we said, will be available. There is the report which got available there, which you can click on, and will people be able to get a copy of the slides if they ask for that as well? And so connect with Matt. You've got his LinkedIn details there. Leaves me to say thank you very much indeed again, Matt. Thank you to everybody who's been in the room. We've had constant conversation throughout this one. This has been fascinating to look at, and you've helped make this session because there's so many questions in there from Matt. Matt spoke a lot, but actually, you guys just asked really smart questions. So thank you for that. Do appreciate it. I will stop the recording and say I'll be closing the room shortly.